So it's my very great pleasure to introduce a dear friend, Natalie Wade, who is the Associate Commissioner at the NDIS Quality and Safeguarding Commission. She's also a lawyer, a disability rights advocate, and her work focuses on embedding the human rights of people with disability in law and policy. Natalie is very well known to many of us in the disability community through her work, and we really look forward to hearing from you, Natalie, for your provocation on this topic. So over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Mary, and good morning for those of us this side of the border, and good afternoon to those who are beyond. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Kaurna people, acknowledge that their land and sovereignty was never ceded, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge all disabled people here today, all of the comrades that I stand beside and have followed in the disability rights movement. What a privilege our work is, and it's so lovely to see so many of you on the call today. So Mary and Sue have asked me to provoke you, which sounds like a fantastic invitation for my Thursday. And I come to you, as Mary rightly said, as the Associate Commissioner of the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. And I can never not be the Associate Commissioner, but I am somewhat accepting the invitation to provoke you, sure, as the Associate Commissioner, but more so probably as someone who has spent a really long time in law reform and public policy reform. And I wanted to share with you some of my curious thoughts about where I think all of you might have some solutions or interesting responses to matters that plague me when I reflect on law reform and public policy change that I have either led or have been heavily involved in, or probably even more so, to be honest, have watched from the sidelines and gone, oh my gosh, what are you doing? We need to not be doing that quite like that. So let's talk what gets in the way for government agencies when faced with law reform and public policy reform, of course. My first provoking thought, I've got 4 of them. My first provoking thought is that often reform is too big. It is targeted in a way that is quite difficult to break down for the relevant government agencies and departments that have relevant authority. Now, I know that sounds like a them problem and not a you problem, but it is entirely, I put to you, a you problem if you want your evidence to become put into action. So what I think most people who operate in civil society or research institutions can easily and understandably skip over is the very deliberate design of government portfolios and the authorising environments that they provide. And so when we put forward evidence-based reforms, it's important that they are presented in a way that acknowledges and works within that reality. That's my first thought. Should I give you an example? I might give you an example. So when I led the provider and worker registration task force last year, we worked on this really polarizing issue of mandatory registration for NDIS providers and workers. And one of the recommendations made was for self-directed supports to be a part of the graduated risk proportionate registration model that the task force put forward to government. And many people are very surprised when I tell them that the commission that I now lead alongside the excellent and erudite Louise Glanville, who is the commissioner, is not the responsible policy agency for self-directed supports. The department is, because the department, now the Department of Health, Disability and Aging, previously before the election was DSS, are responsible for setting the whole of government disability policy, which Jane Spring, who's here, likely spoke to you about a couple of minutes ago. And so it's really important that when you design those reforms, you think about that a little bit carefully. My second provoking thought is that often evidence-based research and thinking can skip on being holistic. Often it can be very specialized and very expert, which is very important, but it's not always presented in a way where it is clear for policymakers and lawmakers to be able to balance different stakeholder issues, to cohesively agree across many different intersecting issues that may be embroiled, or how it will be funded across the whole. So you've come up with a great position. It's clearly based on evidence, but considerations of how it intersects, interacts across a whole system or a whole landscape, and who's going to pay for it can be easily missed because they are not necessarily sitting readily within your evidence base as expert researchers and thought leaders. My third thought-provoking idea is that often evidence-based research proposals and reform does not allow for different timing of the issue. So issues require many different things to become ripe. And I'm sure the minister spoke to you a little bit about some of the levers that government need to be able to bring an issue forward. But it's important, I think, when you are developing your evidence base, that you are aware that things might rush now, or things may take years to come to be in the forefront of everyone's mind. And what challenges for public policy and law reformists is if your work does not age well, if it is very time specific, we need it now. It has to be done now. And that may be very true based on the evidence. But I wonder how you would frame it if you thought, despite its urgency, what if no one thought about this for 5 years? Would your evidence still be relevant? Would it really still be current? Would it need to be reinvested in by government to be updated and thought through again? My fourth and final thought-provoking idea, and this might challenge you, but Mary said I was allowed to, so, bear with me. Often evidence-based research programs and reform proposals assume that they are right. Often, because you're very clever and you have all of the evidence backing up your position, it assumes that that way is the right way and the way that should go forward. But often in government and when looking at an issue from the perspective of multiple stakeholders in civil society, you really have to think about what I would say, and I think this is a bit of a buzzword. I wrote down iterative implementation, but I think that's a bit unhelpful. What I mean by that is taking reform in parts and allowing it to work for lots of different people who may be affected by that reform. But if you've developed an evidence base that says this way is the way it should be done, you don't allow a lot of room for policymakers to say, well, hang on, we might have to do it slightly differently to meet the different needs and demands of lots of people affected. And often, at a public policy Commonwealth level, we're making policy for populations and for large groups of people in all different parts of Australia. That's certainly true for the NDIS, and it's something that we need to be very clear about and have access to agile research and evidence bases that consider how that can be implemented in a way that's safe and productive for everyone. They are my thought provocations is the word I'm looking for. I hope they're helpful. And I'll hand back over to Mary as to whether I'm allowed to receive questions. I might not be.
Mary speaking. Thank you very much, Natalie. I think those provocations are really spot on and really built on the previous presentations as well around how to make change and the processes that are needed to really make change. And I liked your iterative implementation, even though it's a difficult word. I really liked your reflections. So thank you very much, Natalie, and really appreciate it.